Today I'll be breaking down how I made this animation.
It's time for another 3D Community Challenge!
On July 29th, Clinton Jones aka Pwnisher officially announced the Boss Fight 3D Community Challenge.
It's David versus Goliath, big versus small, an eternal battle between good versus evil.
Everyone was hyped for the challenge, including myself. I couldn't wait to start working on it. Although I found out about the challenge right away, but I couldn't start so quickly. At that time I still was working on my latest YouTube video, and I had to finish it before I even start thinking about participating. I finally finished that video and uploaded it at August 12th, if I'm not wrong. When that was done, I could finally catch my breath and start thinking about the challenge and my ideas for it. I spent 3 days coming up with all these ideas, and in the end I had to choose the best one of them, so I narrowed them down to 3 options: Star Wars, God of War, or Arcane. One of the main reasons why I chose to make this Arcane scene was this tutorial made by Lightning Boy Studio, in which he explains how to achieve this Arcane look in Blender and Photoshop. Honestly, he makes it look too easy. I thought to myself that hey, I have the best tutorial on YouTube, I got a solid idea, this cannot be that hard. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Well, I was terribly wrong. I almost forgot that I am not a 2D artist, and painting all these layers in Photoshop isn't really that easy. Taking another look at the final render, obviously you can tell this doesn't really look like Arcane. Not even close. At some point in the project, I just decided to do it in my own way. I gathered some reference images of the hero, the environment, and the mood that I was going for. I was especially influenced by this shot from the episode 8 of Arcane. This fight scene was just amazing. My idea was to have the hero to deliver a mighty blow to the boss. For the environment, I wanted something dark and moody, a bit similar to what was in episode 8 of Arcane, in the fight scene, industrial and dark, maybe some sort of abandoned mine or facility. I started looking at Sketchfab for some good models that I can use for this project. Unfortunately, I found this model of the character V in the Arcane series on Sketchfab. And for the boss, I used this model of Hulkbuster, which is really low poly. I rendered out this image of the boss and took it to Photoshop just to experiment with it and do some paint overs, see how it can look. Well, it didn't look that bad in the end. I mean, considering the fact that I'm not a 2D artist, I would say this is looking pretty good. Now that I knew that this idea might just work, I decided to open Photoshop and do the final paint over for the boss, so I can bring it back into Blender and project this texture onto the model from the camera's perspective. I tried to paint some highlights and textures, overall adding more detail, using different brushes. I'm not really great at this, so I don't really know where to paint the highlights or the shadows like a professional, but I just try to do my best. After it was finished, I went back to Blender and projected the texture onto the model from the camera's perspective. I repeated the same step for the hero. In this method, things look fine from the camera's perspective. But if you turn the camera around, it's just ugly. Well, the way to fix that is to do another paint over from this camera angle, but I was already running low on time. And we're not gonna be able to see the other side of the character anyway. At least not from this camera angle. So I'll just leave it like that. The next step is animation. I uploaded the characters into Mixamo and rigged them over there, applied some of the Mixamo animations to them and imported them back into Blender. For the hero, again I used Mixamo to rig it and animate it. I tried a couple of different animations, but in the end I chose this one. After that, it was just a matter of putting them in the right place. I had to take care of the environment next, and I decided to start with the background. I was totally aware of the fact that I'm running low on time. So for the background, I used the Stable Diffusion AI. I generated a couple of images, chose one of them and just did some minor paint over in Photoshop. That wasn't even noticeable in the end, if I'm being honest. The prompt wasn't even that complicated. I just typed in underground facility, abandoned mine, Arcane, Arcane style, Riot Games, and so on. You can try anything, really. Honestly, the results were better than I expected them to be. And this way, I also saved a whole lot of time. Creating the background from scratch in Blender, that would have taken me way longer. After that, I imported some of these industrial assets that I downloaded from Sketchfab, like the tanker and pipes, and just put them in between the background and the foreground, to add a sense of depth. At this point, the scene was almost coming together. With the background finished, now I had to move on to the foreground. I just put a cube in there with a texture applied to it for the floor. For this railing, I used the Quick Shape add-on to model them really fast. It didn't even take me a minute, seriously. I wanted the railing to look kind of organic and stylized at the same time, so I used the lasso tool to draw the shape like this, and I repeated this a couple of times till I had the railings done. Then I applied the stylized wood texture to it. I imported some of these assets from Sketchfab so I could scatter them all around the foreground by hand to make the foreground a little bit more interesting. Now I should also mention this. To make the foreground feel a little bit dark, I just manipulated the material of these models a little bit. For example, this railing with the wood texture, by default, it looks like this in Eevee. And that's just not how I wanted them to look. I wanted the foreground to look a little bit darker, a little bit more moody, and you can also say that the foreground adds this natural vignette to the scene, putting the focus mostly on the character and the hero. I use a mix RGB node, and I put the blending mode on multiply, and I just mix it with a darker color. Usually a dark blue color. That's exactly what gives it that look. It looks like it's in the shadows, and that's the kind of look I was going for. So that's perfect. The final step is adding the electricity effect, and of course the hit effect for after the punch. For these effects I use this pack from FX Masters called Cartoon Action Elements. Well, this pack is for After Effects, so I rendered them in After Effects and then imported the footages back into Blender. After that I just placed them by hand wherever I saw fit. It was that easy. And with that, the scene is done and ready to be rendered. If you liked the video, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.